Welcome back. Today we'll tour the house of Lucius Caecilius Jucundus and talk about the kinds of rooms and interior spaces that we typically find in large Roman houses. Caecilius's house is located in Pompeii on Stabii Street, which is named for its destination. Just as Bandera Road will take you to Bandera, if you follow Stabii Street outside the walls of Pompeii, you'll come to another town called Stabii. It's right in the middle of the city, and as you can see, it's right up on the street. The large entryway, which we'll look into in just a second, has on either side of it open spaces that were occupied by shops, tabernae. We don't know what they sold in the shops, but it's thought that Caecilius owned these and rented them out to tenants. There's no access from these shops to the house. The entryway into Caecilius's house simply passes between them into a large space that we'll discuss in just a minute. Looking directly into the house, which would not have been possible in Caecilius's time because this would have been closed off by a massive wooden door, we can see that the house is organized around a couple of open interior spaces. The front door, or janua, would have closed this off. Just to give you a sense of scale, and it's a really large house. There's a metal grating here with a doorway in it. This is modern, and the doorknob's right here. So you can see that this is a really tall entryway, massive, imposing entryway. If I was a realtor, I'd be telling you, well, it's a fixer-upper. You need to imagine all this brickwork being covered by plaster. You can see some of that along the street wall, and the plaster would have been painted in the Romans' preferred colors of red and black and yellow and white, right? So all kinds of paintings on the walls, no exposed stonework or brickwork. You just have to use your imagination here. The narrow passageway that we pass through to enter these interior spaces was called the fauces, the throat of the house. Think of the English word faucet, which is actually comes from the word fauces. So you pass through the throat of the house and you come into something called the atrium. All right, so now we're looking at the house from above. This is Google Earth, so the label here reads Casa di Cecilio Giocondo. It's Italian. If you looked closely on the door, and scroll back and check, you'll see there's a little sign placed there by archaeologists in Latin that says Domus Lucii Caecilii Jucundi. Anyway, here's our Stabia Street right here, Stabii Street, going towards Stabii. Here are the two shops, tabernae, and here's the fauces, or entrance hall. The roof has been restored here. Most of these rooms would have been roofed over, with two exceptions, because the house is organized around two open spaces. One, a small opening in the ceiling that allows rainwater to fill a pool in the main reception hall or atrium of the house, and the other, a green space or garden, hortus, in the back that was surrounded by a colonnade, columns shading a walkway that went around it. All right. Now, as far as where Caecilius's property lines are, his house, like a lot of townhouses in the world, is built right onto the neighbors. There's no space between, and it runs from front to back. Right, this wall and this wall. There's an alley in the back, right, with a rear entrance, but there's no access from either side because the house is simply built onto other houses. All right, so these shops are kept separate, even though Caecilius probably owned them, and the main entrance to the house is through the fauces right here. All right, there are bedrooms along either side. These are the bedrooms for the family. There are two dining areas, one over here and one at the back of the house adjacent to the garden. And there is prominently placed in the house an office space, a tablinum, right here, with access both this way and this way. Curtains can be drawn to seal it off, but this is where Caecilius does his money-lending business. This cutaway 3D drawing is found on page 11 in your book. That's based on Caecilius's house. Here we see the roof restored, the roof tiles sloping inward in the front part of the house, guiding rainwater into the pool, as well as in the back of the house surrounding the garden. The tiles are those characteristic cylindrical, terracotta Mediterranean tiles that we still see on Italian-style houses today. The other thing we see are a list of the terms that we'll need to become familiar with in talking about Caecilius's house, and these are over on the right-hand side. I've already talked about the fauces, and I've mentioned its resemblance to the word faucet. The word means throat, and it's the entrance hall through which one passes from the street to the atrium. Atrium is a word we still used to describe an interior space that's open to the sky. Think the atrium of a big luxury hotel, for example. Cubiculum, plural cubicula, are bedrooms, and there are many of them in the house. Tablinum is the office where Caecilius does his business. Peristilium is it says garden court. Peri means around. Stili is in Greek means columns, and this is because this area is surrounded, has columns that go around it. The area in the center, we'll learn, is called the hortus, or garden. Triclinium is the word for dining room. If you recognize the number 3 in the prefix, that's because each dining room had 3 couches upon which the banqueters would recline to eat. More on that later. The last 2 words should be transparent to you. Culina, as in culinary, is the kitchen. Latrina, as in latrine, is the toilet. Lavatory, they're revealing their Britishness right there with that word. Janua, I mentioned earlier when we looked at the front door, it means front door. Impluvium is that pool. And then Lararium we'll talk about later, but it's a little household shrine that most Romans had in the central hall of their house. This brings us back to our example sentences for stage 1, number 8, Caecilius est in tablino. The picture shows us Caecilius writing at a table in his office. The view towards the right-hand side of the picture is a view into the garden. So the curtains have been drawn back and Caecilius can work with the view of the garden. Here's the greenery. You see the columns that surround the hortus, the so-called peristilium, back there. All right, hopefully you remember that the Latin word est means is. Hopefully you can guess that the Latin word in means the same thing this word means in English. Caecilius is in the office. Now, I introduced the word tablinum before, ending with the letters U-M. You notice here that it ends with the letter O. I don't want you to worry about that right now. We will explain the reason for that later. Words change their endings a lot in Latin, but just for now, know that tablinum and tablino are the same thing, the office. Now, you might think, looking at the picture, that the word tablinum was named after the table that Caecilius is writing at, but you'd be wrong. The Latin word for table is actually mensa, as in mesa in Spanish. The tablinum is named for the tabulae, singular tabula, that Caecilius and other Romans kept records on. So the room in which business transactions were performed, records were kept, would be called the tablinum, because this is where these records would be stored. Number 9, metella est in atrio. In this picture, we're in Caecilius's office, and we're looking towards the front of the house. The front door, or janua, is right here, the far end of the entryway. The hole in the roof that lets the rainwater in is up here. The pool in which the water is collected is down below. This is the more public area of the house in which guests and clients, business associates are formally received. So here, metella est, and then again, et atrium becomes in atrio for reasons that we will discuss later on. Number 10, quintus est in triclinio. Now, you might think that this was the bedroom because here's Quintus lying on a bed. But like I already said, Romans, or at least wealthy Romans, ate the main meal of the day reclining on couches, and the room in which they did so was called the triclinium for the number of couches that it contained. So tri means 3, and as you can see, there are 1, 2, 3 couches in this room. We'll talk more about Roman banquet culture at a later stage, but this room, triclinium, means dining room. And once again, I want you to notice that the word triclinium, when following the word in, changes to triclinio with no difference in meaning. Quintus is in the dining room. Number 11, Lucia est in horto. We're back in Caecilius's office, looking out into the garden. And there's Lucia. The Latin word for garden is hortus, source of the English word horticulture, which is just a fancy word for gardening, the cultivation of a hortus, just as agriculture, farming, is the cultivation of the ager, or field. All right, number 12, Clemens est in cubiculo. Clemens is in the bedroom, but he's not there to sleep. He's got a broom in his hands. The Latin word for broom is scopai, source of the Spanish word escoba. There's a bed against the back wall. The word for bed is lectus. It's the same word that applies to the couches in the dining room. And against the right-hand wall is what's known as an armarium, kind of like an armoire, because Romans didn't have built-in closets, so they stored their stuff in furniture. Okay, number 13, grumio est in culina. Culina means kitchen. You know that because you know the word culinary. Culinary refers to things that pertain to the kitchen. If you go to culinary school, you're studying to be a chef. Grumio is the cook in Caecilius's house. Coquus is the word that means cook. What he's holding in his hand is called a crater, a crater. We refer to the craters on the moon as such because they resemble bowls. He cooks over a wood or a charcoal fire, which he feeds from these holes underneath, and he puts pots into holes in the top, on top of the fire, and that's where he cooks. The Latin word for pot is olla, which, pronounced differently, olla, is the Spanish word for a pot today. Okay, number 14, the last sentence in this section, Cerberus est in via. The dog's not in the house at all, he's in the street. The Latin word via means street, road, or way. We use the word via in English to describe the way that we get somewhere. He traveled via train, via bus, via plane. You go to the ticket counter and they say you'll be traveling to New York via Atlanta, by way of Atlanta. Okay. The city buses in San Antonio were rebranded in the 1970s as the Via buses, and when they rolled that out, they had an ad campaign that said you could get to your destination quickly and easily via Via. Now, I want to remind you that the V always sounds like a W in Latin, so in this class we're going to say this word via, and I want to caution you against confusing this word with the Latin word for house, which is villa. Right? Via means road, villa means house. That's all for now. We'll come back next time and see the members of the family doing stuff in the rooms in the house.